Hello, my name is David Musk and I've been a driving instructor for the last 23 years and an instructor trainer for the last 15 years. Hello, my name is Harry and I am learning to drive and I've had around about 35 hours of tuition with David. We have a series of videos coming up that hopefully will help you to pass your Part 3 test or your standards check test. We are walking through each individual step of a driving lesson so that you'll cover the 17 competencies on the Part 3 marking sheet. The videos will show techniques and skills to check the pupil's body language and their rapport. So not only does this help passing your Part 3 or standards check, these videos also help with you to give a great lesson that gives value for money where learning takes place. Okay, so after you've completed the cockpit drill with Harry and made sure that he is set up correctly, then we can now go on to finding and identifying the pupil's goals and needs. So normally what David would do at this point is ask me maybe what happened on the last lesson, or if there's anything I was concerned about on the last lesson, but he would also ask me if there's anything particularly that I wanted to achieve today. If they aren't sure what they want to do, as Harry has just said, make sure you go back in your notes and find out what happened in the last lesson, or maybe they've had some private practice. Either way, try to encourage the pupil to choose the subject. Now the subject is not the goal. So the subject is like a concrete thing, like junctions or roundabouts or meeting traffic or crossing the path of traffic or anything like that. The goal should be their feelings and their values. Now, as driving instructors, you may get pupils that say they don't know or they're not sure what they want to achieve, and this is perfectly okay. Then you can maybe look at the last lesson they've done in your notes as a driving instructor and maybe give them some encouragement to look at that last lesson to see what happened, and maybe you've already got a goal in mind, but just make sure that the subject can be chosen by the instructor, but the goal must be chosen by the pupil. And the goal is all about making sure that the pupil is expressing their feelings and values. So say for instance it's a roundabout that Harry wants to look at. What does he actually want to do at those roundabouts? What is his concerns and his worries and his feelings about that roundabout? So the sort of question I would ask Harry at first is, what would you like to do today? If he said roundabouts, the next thing I would do is jump straight into scaling. So you can ask Harry, where would you scale yourself on roundabouts? One being, I'm absolutely petrified of roundabouts. I hate them, I can't do them at all, and I always need your support. And 10 being, do you know what, David? I can do them on my own. I don't need your help, and I want you to be quiet so I can just get on with them. So that sort of scaling is quite good fun for the pupil because they can sort of go from one extreme to the other, and they'll give you a mark or a score out of 10. Okay, exactly. So now David has asked me to scale my roundabouts. I would give a number. So say for instance I'm feeling not that confident on something on roundabouts, I would say I give myself about a 5 out of 10. Then David will come back to me and say, well, why have you given yourself that score? And then that would help me to express my feelings and values about why I've given myself that score of 5 out of 10. So I might say, well, you know, it's just the gap finding. I'm finding it hard to find gaps at roundabouts. Sometimes you've had to step in verbally or use the dual brake because I went to go at the roundabout and there was a car coming round and you've had to stop me and I didn't understand why. And sometimes you've had to say to me, go, because there's a gap and I'm waiting. So I'm never quite sure when the gap is there, when I'm waiting at a roundabout, and when the gap isn't there. Okay, so that's quite a lot of information now that the instructor has. Now it may be that your pupils don't always give that amount of information to you, so you might have to use a little bit of Q&A to draw out exactly what they want to do. So for instance, if you get someone that gives a scale of 5 and they say, I don't seem to be able to find gaps at roundabouts, you could maybe get a picture out if they're quite visual learners, or maybe just talk to them so they can think about the roundabout if they're quite audio, or if they're quite kinesthetic, in other words, they like to have a go, then you might go about it a slightly different way. A lot of learners are all 3 styles, so bear that in mind as well. But hopefully with the scaling, you'll have a really good idea of what the pupil wants to achieve. Exactly, Harry. So from that scaling, now I can actually start to structure a lesson that facilitates the goal that Harry wants to achieve. So he said, I'm not really sure where gaps are. Sometimes you'll break me. Sometimes I miss a gap. You say go. So I'm not really understanding where these blockers are coming round from the roundabout, when I should go and when I shouldn't. So the next stage is to simply ask Harry how much help he needs with procedure coming up to a roundabout. How much help does he need with finding gaps at roundabouts? So he might say to you, well, what do you mean? So you can say to him, well, do you want me to give you a full talk you through the whole thing? So that I take most of the responsibility as a driving instructor, so that you can listen to what I'm saying? Or will that confuse you? Would you prefer if I just asked you questions when we get to the roundabout? Like, where are you looking now? Where's that white car going? What signal has he got on? Where's the position of the wheels? What sort of speed is that car doing coming around the roundabout? So asking questions. Or would Harry like to have a go and experiment and show me exactly what he can do, and I will sit there in silence? So you need to know your pupil at this particular point, okay? So if they want to experiment, then they can, as long as you're giving the correct risk statement, and we'll come on to that in a moment. For the moment, we need to find out what Harry wants to do. Exactly. So then you're becoming very client-centered. Now, when we say client-centered as driving instructors, it is important that David makes sure that the goal is achievable. So in other words, depending on what stage Harry is at or what stage I am at, it's important that David recognises that. So if independent instruction isn't achievable, then David might not actually give me that option. But I've had 35 hours of tuition, and David is sure that if I wanted to have a go and experiment at finding gaps at roundabouts, if that's what I wanted to show David that I think I can do it, then that would be perfectly acceptable because David knows his pupil, me. Okay, so he's given me those 3 options. Do I want full guided talk through? Do I want to be asked questions, Q&A? Or do I want silence so I could show David what I can do on the roundabout, and then he could step in if needed to help me? So it just so happens that I've decided that I want full guided instruction talk through on the gap finding at roundabouts. So it's really important now that David makes sure we know exactly who's taking responsibility for what when we're coming up to the roundabout. That's exactly it. So now I know Harry really well, so I would ask him a question. So on the approach, how are you feeling about your mirrors, signal and position? Now Harry I know he's going to say that he's okay with his mirrors, he's okay with his signal, and he's okay with his positioning coming up to the roundabout. Now, in a moment, you'll find that Harry will accept that responsibility, but again, look at the pupil's body language to make sure that they're happy with taking that responsibility. But if you know your pupil, then normally at first part of the MSP, mirror signal position, they should be able to take quite a lot of responsibility for that. So now I know where we lie with responsibility split. And I would say to Harry, okay, on the approach to this roundabout that we're going to do, I want you to take responsibility for the mirrors, the signal, the position, and the speed, including the gear, and I'm going to give you full talk through on the gap finding at the roundabout or on the approach to the roundabout. Exactly. So now I'm sat in the car thinking, okay, well, I understand what my responsibilities are, and I understand what David, my instructor, is going to do on the approach to the roundabout. And that's really important, because if you're going off from the side of the road at the beginning without identifying the pupil's goals and their needs, then you really haven't got a lesson there at all, and really learning isn't going to take place. But that's not the only thing we need to work out with the goal setting and the needs of the pupil. No, it's not, because the next thing we need to do is to make sure that we know what's going to happen outside the goal as well, because we need to manage the risk outside the goal, and we need to identify what the pupil wants to do outside the goal, because it's going to take a while for us to get to the roundabout. So we need to make sure that before Harry sets off today, that he understands what responsibilities he has outside the goal. And it would work something like this. Okay, Harry, so in a moment we're going to set off and drive, and I'll explain what the structure of the route is in a minute to you. But before we do that, how much responsibility do you want to take outside the goal? Now, Harry might say, what do you mean? And you just say, well, we've got to get to the roundabouts. So in your general drive, what sort of support do you need from me? You could suggest something. You could say, are you okay if I just ask you some questions? Yeah, that's it. So, and this is really important on a driving lesson, because I need to understand exactly what's going to happen before we get to the roundabout. A question now and again to check my knowledge, to make sure that I understand what's going to happen. That's perfectly acceptable to me and would be acceptable to most pupils. Okay, so now we know the responsibility split inside the goal and outside the goal. So now we are pretty much ready to drive on. But before that happens, it's important that Harry knows what the structure and the time periods are, so that he knows what's going to happen. So you need to sort of tell a little story about what's now going to happen when they set off. So it would be something like this. Okay, Harry, so I've got a route in mind. It's going to last around about 10 minutes, and it's going to involve doing 3 roundabouts. We're going to have to get up to those roundabouts, so there's 3 or 4 junctions we're going to have to deal with, and as we've discussed, I may ask you the odd question when we get to those junctions, just to make sure, just to check your knowledge. We've also obviously got to drive away from here, so I'm assuming you're taking full responsibility for that, so I will stay silent. In fact, apart from the odd question, I would probably stay silent most of the way up to the roundabout. So I want you to take as much responsibility as possible. As we've said already, once we get to the roundabout, you're taking responsibility for the mirror, signal, position, speed, but I'm going to be helping you with the gap finding and where to look and where the cars are going on the roundabout, so you can make some progress where applicable. Okay? So as far as the responsibilities go, if there's any problems or there's any high risk situations that occur, I've got ways that I can help you. So I've got a dual clutch and a dual brake, or I can move the steering wheel. If that happens, then we may pull over a little bit earlier and have a little discussion about it if I feel like it's applicable. But because I've got these controls by my feet, and because I can move the steering wheel, you're completely and utterly safe at all times. So feel free to experiment when you're outside the goal, and feel free to experiment inside the goal as well, because you're absolutely safe, because I can keep you safe with the clutch and the brake or moving the steering wheel. So then your risk statement becomes quite friendly. And that's really important, because what you're doing with that risk statement is letting the pupil know that they're completely safe and you can take over and they're free to experiment. So the risk statement shouldn't be wooden, it should be quite fluid and friendly, with lots of rapport and eye contact with Harry the pupil. And that's exactly it, because now as a pupil I feel quite comfortable. I know that I can experiment when I want to. I know that I'm going to be asked questions on the way to the roundabout. I know that if I make a mistake, it's not going to be a big issue. I know that I probably will get pulled over if it's a mistake where the risk was really high and we have to chat about it. Other than that, if that doesn't happen, I know I'm going to be doing 3 roundabouts, and I know that I'm going to have full guided talk through on the gap finding at the roundabout, but the rest of the procedure on the approach to the roundabout is down to me. It's my responsibility. So we've now identified the pupil's goals and needs. We've given the lesson some structure. We've given a risk statement, and I'm quite happy and comfortable. We can now drive on. Okay, so I can see you all screaming into your phones or iPads or desktops, thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've got to get all this information in 2 minutes and get the wheels moving, 2 or 3 minutes on a part 3 or standards check. There's no real worries about getting in the information that we've just talked about in 5 or 6 minutes, and that's probably what it would take to get all that information in. Don't forget, we're going through the intricacies of it as well on this video, so you would, on a standards check or part 3, don't forget you're relaying the information about the goal, because the goal's already been set. So in other words, when you jump in the car and your examiner sits in the back and you start, you are only relaying the goal to the pupil. A bit like this. So Harry, I know you wanted to have a look at roundabouts today. Is that right? Harry says yes. Okay, what exactly, or remind me what you wanted to do at roundabouts. Oh, I wanted to look at gap finding. What was the problem with gap finding? Oh, it was because sometimes I'm hesitant, sometimes you say I can go. Okay, and remind me about this, this and this. So you can see that because it's all, the goal is already set, then that is a lot quicker to sort out. And your examiner will realise that as well. So you don't need to spend as much time as you would on a, for want of a better phrase, a real lesson. Although this should be a real lesson on your part 3 or standards check, because you haven't got to set the goals, you haven't got to set the needs of the pupil. It's already been set on a part 3 or standards check, because you know the pupil, you've sorted the goal out with the hour's drive before your part 3 or the day before. Just to clarify that, just in case you're thinking, how do I fit all this information in? Looking forward to seeing you all on part 2 of this video, where we actually drive off from the side of the road and deal with this roundabout and finding gaps.